The invoice arrived on a Tuesday morning, printed on Sterling Crest Motors letterhead, and it read $200,000. Clara Renshaw had built Renshaw Meridian Group from a single office and a borrowed desk. She had negotiated contracts worth 9 figures. She did not rattle easily, but when she set that invoice down on the conference table and looked at the 8 identical line items, one for each of her company's luxury vehicles, all flagging the same 14 safety warnings, all reportedly requiring full control module replacement, something felt wrong in a way she couldn't quite name. Sterling Crest had been confident. The service director had used words like comprehensive failure and systemic fault and no other option. Her own operations team nodded along. Her lawyers flagged the warranty risk. Everyone in that room agreed. Pay the bill. Then someone mentioned a name. A garage on Branton Row. An 18-year-old kid who had once been fired from Sterling Crest itself for telling a customer the wrong part was being replaced. Adrian Vale looked at the invoice, listened to the symptoms, and said the problem was a 14 fuse. The room laughed. Adrian reached into his pocket and placed a single burned fuse on the table. Then he asked who had turned a 14 fix into a 200,000 fraud. If you're new here, this channel is where we tell stories about everyday people who refused to be pushed around. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Branton Row was the kind of street that used to mean something. 20 years ago, the auto shops along this stretch ran 3 bays deep and kept waiting lists. Now half the storefronts were dark, and the ones still open wore their age without apology, peeling paint, cracked concrete, hand-lettered signs that nobody had updated in a decade. Vale Sun Garage sat at the far end of the block, wedged between a closed laundromat and a fire hydrant that leaked every winter. The sign above the roll-up door still read the original name, though one corner had come loose and tilted downward at an angle that made it look like the letters themselves were trying to leave. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered. The lift groaned when loaded. The space heater in the corner worked only when it felt like it. Adrian Vale was 18 years old, and this was everything he had left. His father, Gideon Vale, had run this garage for 23 years. Gideon was the kind of mechanic who didn't need a diagnostic readout to know what was wrong with an engine. He listened to it, the way a doctor listens to a chest. Customers came from 3 counties over because Gideon had told them the truth when other shops had not. He charged fair, he fixed what was broken, and nothing else. He was, by every account that mattered, the best honest mechanic in the region. He had been dead for 14 months. What he left behind was a son with fast hands and a good ear, a garage with 6 months of unpaid rent, and a reputation that meant nothing without the man who had built it. Customers who had trusted Gideon for years looked at Adrian and saw a teenager. Some of them said it kindly. Most of them just stopped coming. The one person who had not left was Martin Keel. Martin was 61, had worked alongside Gideon for 32 years, and had the particular kind of loyalty that doesn't ask to be thanked and doesn't explain itself. He showed up every morning, made the coffee, and worked. He didn't talk much about the future. He didn't pretend things were fine. But he stayed, and in the language of Branton Row, that meant everything. It was Martin who was with Adrian the night they found the photograph. Adrian had been clearing out the bottom drawer of his father's old desk, the one that stuck and required a specific 2-handed technique to open, looking for a parts invoice from 3 years back. Instead, he found a photograph tucked beneath a folded service manual and a broken tire gauge. The image was faded at the edges. 2 men standing in front of an open engine bay, both of them grinning in the way people grin when something has just gone right. One of them was Gideon, unmistakably younger, his hair still dark. The other was a man Adrian didn't recognize. He flipped the photo over, on the back, in his father's handwriting, for Roland B., Winter 2004. Martin looked over his shoulder and went quiet for a moment. "That's Roland Bellamy," he said finally. Adrian didn't recognize the name. "Your father taught him everything he knew, back when Roland was just starting out." Martin set down his coffee. They had a falling out. Maybe 2006, 2007. Roland wanted to go up the ladder manufacturer side, corporate engineering. Your father thought he was leaving what mattered behind. He paused. The reason they really fought was because your father found out the company. Roland was joining, had buried a safety bulletin on a brake component. Gideon wanted Roland to walk away from the offer. Roland said he could do more good from the inside. They argued about it for 2 weeks and never fully resolved it. Adrian studied the photograph. "Does Roland remember my dad?" Martin was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said, "but I know. Your father never stopped believing Roland would do right if it came down to it." Adrian set the photo on the desk and didn't think about it again. Not yet. The call came at 11:40 on a Wednesday night. Adrian was still in the garage, running a compression test on a pickup that a regular had dropped off that morning. Martin had gone home hours ago. The space heater had given up around 9. Adrian was working in his coat, breath fogging under the fluorescent light, when his phone buzzed against the workbench. The number was unfamiliar. He almost let it go to voicemail. "Is this Vale and Son?" The voice on the other end was composed, precise, the voice of someone who was used to being answered. "It is," Adrian said. "My name is Clara Renshaw. I run Renshaw Meridian Group. I was told you might be able to help me with a diagnostic problem. I understand if the hour is inconvenient." Adrian wiped his hands on a shop rag. "What's the problem?" Clara explained it plainly. She had a fleet of 8 vehicles, same make, same model year, same trim level. All 8 had been brought into Sterling Crest Motors 3 weeks ago for routine scheduled maintenance. All 8 had come back with the same result: 14 active safety warnings across the dashboard, and a service recommendation to replace the entire central control module system. Sterling Crest had quoted her $25,000 per vehicle. 8 vehicles. The total came to $200,000. "They told me it was a systemic fault," Clara said, "that all 8 modules had degraded simultaneously." Adrian didn't say anything immediately. He was already running the numbers in his head. Same make, same model, same fault code pattern, all triggered after the same service visit. "Did the warnings appear before or after the maintenance?" he asked. "After. All 8, within 48 hours of pickup." "Were any of the vehicles showing symptoms before the visit? Hesitation, electrical flicker, anything like that?" "Not that any of the drivers reported." Adrian leaned against the workbench. He knew this vehicle line. He had spent 8 months at Sterling Crest Motors as a lot attendant and general cleanup, the lowest position in the building, before being dismissed. During that time, he had made it his business to read every technical bulletin posted in the service bay, not because anyone asked him to, but because that was the kind of person he was. His father had taught him that information was the cheapest tool a mechanic could own. He remembered a bulletin about the F-47 thermal fuse. It was a known issue on this model line, a fuse that read normal in cold conditions but failed under sustained heat, causing a voltage drop that the vehicle's safety system misread as multiple simultaneous module failures. The bulletin had listed the fix clearly. Replace the F-47 fuse, cost of part approximately $14. He had read that bulletin sitting on an overturned crate in the break room on a slow Thursday afternoon. He had read it, filed it away, and moved on. "I don't think your modules are failing," Adrian said. A pause. "Explain." "There's a thermal fuse in the circuit, the F-47, when the engine runs hot. It can drop voltage in a way that triggers false module fault codes. All 14 of them, all at once. It looks like a catastrophic failure. It isn't." He kept his voice even. "The fix is a $14 fuse replacement. Maybe 20 minutes of labor." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Adrian thought he'd lost the call. "Sterling Crest Motors has certified master technicians," Clara said carefully. They have factory diagnostic equipment. I know, Adrian said. I used to work there. Another pause. Then, how did you come to know about this fuse issue? I read the technical bulletin. It was posted in their own service bay. Clara did not respond right away. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted, not warmer, exactly, but more focused, like a person who has just decided something. I'd like to send one of the vehicles to your garage, she said. Can you look at it tomorrow? Adrian looked around the garage, the dripping ceiling, the tilted sign, the space heater sitting cold in the corner. Yes, he said. I can look at it tomorrow. After Clara hung up, Adrian stood in the garage for a long time without moving. He knew what this was, not just a diagnostic job, a test. Clara Renshaw had not called him because she trusted him. She had called him because someone had mentioned his name, and she was running out of reasonable options. She would send one vehicle. She would watch what he did with it. And if he was wrong, if he opened that car, touched that system, and came back with nothing, he wouldn't just lose the job. He would be the 18-year-old kid from the broken-down garage on Branton Row who had wasted a wealthy woman's time and embarrassed himself in front of people who already expected him to fail. He thought about the letter on his father's desk, the one from the landlord. 60 days, it said. After that, the lease would go to someone else. He thought about Martin showing up every morning without being asked, making coffee for a garage that was barely staying alive. He thought about the last thing his father had ever said to him, standing in this same bay, hands black with grease. You see what's actually there, Adrian, not what someone tells you is there. That's the only thing that matters in this work. He called Martin. Martin picked up on the third ring, groggy but not annoyed. Adrian told him about the call, told him about Clara Renshaw, the 8 vehicles, the 200,000 quote, the F-47 fuse. Martin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You sure about the fuse? I'm sure about the bulletin. I need to put my hands on the car to confirm it. And if you're right, then I'm right. And if Sterling Crest decides, they don't like being wrong. Adrian didn't answer that immediately. He already knew the answer, and so did Martin. Sterling Crest Motors was not a small operation. It was a franchised dealership with manufacturer backing, a legal team, and 17 years of established relationships with exactly the kind of corporate clients that Clara Renshaw represented. If Adrian proved them wrong, he wouldn't just be correcting a diagnostic error. He would be accusing them implicitly, undeniably, of charging $200,000 for a repair that cost $14. That was not the kind of accusation a garage with a tilted sign and a broken space heater made without consequences. I know what it means, Adrian said. I know you do, Martin said. I just want to make sure you've said it out loud. Adrian looked at the photograph still sitting on the desk. His father, young and grinning, standing next to Roland Bellamy in front of an engine they had apparently just fixed. 2 men who had started with nothing and built something with their hands. I'm taking the job, Adrian said. Martin exhaled, not relief exactly, but the sound of a man settling into something he had already accepted. The vehicle arrived. The following morning, at 8:15, a black luxury sedan, current model year, driven by a man in a pressed jacket who looked at the Vale Sun sign with an expression he didn't bother to hide. He handed over the key fob without a word, took a photo of the garage exterior on his phone, and left. Adrian stood in the bay and looked at the car. It was the most expensive thing that had ever been inside this building. He put on his father's work gloves, picked up the diagnostic scanner, and got to work. The scanner read 14 fault codes before Adrian had even finished connecting it. He wrote each one down by hand in his father's old notebook, the spiral-bound one, with the cracked cover that Gideon had used to log every job going back 15 years. Adrian had started using it after the funeral because buying a new one felt wasteful, and because there was something steadying about writing in the same margins his father had written in. 14 codes, all safety system related, all pointing toward central module failure. If he had been a different kind of mechanic, or if he had been working from the same assumptions as Sterling Crest, he would have stopped there. The codes were clear. The machine said what the machine said. Replace the modules. But Adrian had learned from a man who didn't trust machines more than his own hands, and so he went further. He set up his father's analog voltage meter. An old unit, nothing digital. Nothing that auto-corrected or filtered readings and clamped it directly to the F47 fuse circuit. Then he started the car and let it idle. For the first 4 minutes, the readings were normal. Voltage steady. No fault codes active. The car sat in the bay and hummed, like nothing was wrong. Martin arrived at 8:40, poured 2 coffees, and pulled up a stool without being asked. He watched Adrian watch the meter and didn't say anything. At the 7-minute mark, the engine temperature crossed into the normal operating range. The voltage reading dipped not dramatically, just a fraction of a volt, the kind of fluctuation that a modern digital scanner might smooth over or ignore entirely. Adrian's old meter showed it plainly. At 9 minutes, the voltage dropped again. At 11 minutes, all 14 fault codes reappeared simultaneously on the dashboard. Adrian looked at Martin. Martin looked at the dashboard. Neither of them spoke. Adrian shut the engine off, let the car cool for 20 minutes, then replaced the F47 fuse with a new unit from the parts shelf. $14. He restarted the car. Let it run past the 11-minute mark, past 15, past 20. No fault codes, nothing. The dashboard was clean. He ran the test twice more to be certain. Same result each time. The fuse failed under heat, the voltage dropped, the system threw false alarms. New fuse, no alarms. The repair took 19 minutes, including both test cycles. Then he sat down at the workbench and wrote the report. It took him 4 hours. 12 pages, formatted as cleanly as he could manage on a second-hand laptop. He included the voltage readings at each temperature interval, photographs of the meter, screenshots of the fault codes appearing and clearing, a timeline of the test procedure, and a technical reference to the F47 bulletin. He wrote it the way his father had always told him to document work, not for himself, but for whoever needed to understand it later. On the last page, he added a single note. The F47 thermal fuse failure and its associated false fault pattern is documented in a technical service bulletin issued by the manufacturer. This bulletin identifies the root cause, describes the diagnostic procedure, and specifies the correct repair. The bulletin was publicly available to authorized dealerships at the time of the original service visit. While writing, his mind drifted back to a Thursday afternoon at Sterling Crest Motors, sitting on an overturned crate in the break room, reading through the service bulletins posted on the internal board. The F47 bulletin had been there. He remembered it clearly. But he also remembered something else he had registered without fully processing at the time, above the bulletin title. There had been a status line, and the status had looked different from the others. Not the standard green active marker, but something else. Something that didn't match. He stared at the last page of his report for a long moment. Then he added one final line. It is worth confirming whether this bulletin was flagged as active and accessible to technicians at the time of service. He saved the document, attached it to an email, and sent it to Clara Renshaw. Clara forwarded the report to Sterling Crest Motors the same afternoon she received it. She sent it to 2 people simultaneously. Lydia Karras, the dealership's general manager, and copied Damon Krell, the director of service operations, with a note that she expected a formal response within 24 hours, and that she would be making no decisions until she had reviewed that response alongside Adrian's findings. It languished on Lydia's desk. Lydia had run Sterling Crest for 9 years and had built it into one of the highest volume luxury service centers in the region. She was not a person who panicked easily. And she was not a person who liked being told her operation had made a 200,000 mistake. She opened the report expecting to dismiss it in 10 minutes. She was still reading 40 minutes later. The documentation was precise. The methodology was sound. The voltage data was presented clearly enough that even a non-technical reader could follow the logic. Lydia had read thousands of service reports over her career. This one was better than most of them. She closed the laptop and sat with that fact for a moment. If the report was correct, and she could not find a single technical argument against it, then her service department had quoted a client $200,000 to replace parts that did not need replacing. That was not a diagnostic error she could attribute to equipment limitations or technician oversight. That was something else. Something she was not yet ready to name. She did not respond to Clara immediately. She told herself she needed more information. What she didn't know was that Damon had already acted. Damon Krell had been the director of service operations at Sterling Crest for 11 years. He oversaw diagnostic procedures, managed the technician teams, and approved all major repair quotes before they went to clients. He had personally authorized the $200,000 quote for Clara Renshaw's fleet. He had also been the one to fire Adrian Vale. 18 months earlier, Adrian had been working as a lot attendant when a customer came in to collect her car after a brake service and asked Adrian, casually, whether the repair had gone smoothly. Adrian had looked at the paperwork, looked at the car, and told her honestly that the rear rotors had been replaced. But the caliper slide pins, the likely root cause of her original complaint, had not been serviced. The customer had gone directly to Damon. Damon had fired Adrian that same day for what he called interfering with service relationships and undermining client confidence. When Adrian had asked whether the caliper pins were going to be addressed, Damon had told him that a lot attendant's job was to park cars, not diagnose them. Now that same lot attendant had produced a 12-page report that made Damon's department look either incompetent or dishonest. Damon read the report once quickly. Then, he made 2 phone calls, first to Sterling Crest's legal counsel, then to Clara Renshaw directly. He did not argue the technical findings. He knew the report was solid, and attacking the methodology would only draw more attention to it. Instead, he focused on something else entirely. "Mrs. Renshaw," he said, his voice carrying the measured calm of a man who had managed difficult conversations for 2 decades. "I want to make sure you have the full picture before you make any decisions." He explained that Adrian Vale was 18 years old, that he held no manufacturer certifications, that he had no authorization to access the vehicle's onboard systems, that under the terms of Clara's fleet warranty agreement, a package worth $1.4 million across all 8 vehicles, any unauthorized third-party intervention in the electrical system could be grounds for full warranty invalidation. "We're not trying to create problems for anyone," Damon said. "We just want to make sure your assets are protected." Clara said she would need to consult with her team. She hung up and stared at the report on her desk for a long time. The report hadn't changed, but the room had gotten considerably more complicated. The meeting happened the following morning in the Renshaw Meridian Group boardroom on the 14th floor. Clara had called it herself. Around the table sat Elliot Marlowe, the company's chief operating officer, 2 members of the legal team, and the fleet manager who had originally scheduled the vehicles for service. Clara had also extended a formal meeting invitation to Sterling Crest's leadership. Damon had confirmed attendance, and Lydia Karras had accepted as well, recognizing that with a client of Clara's scale, her presence as general manager was appropriate. Adrian had been invited directly by Clara. Adrian arrived in his father's garage jacket, the name Vale stitched across the left chest in faded blue thread. He carried a laptop and a small plastic bag containing the burned F-47 fuse. He sat down at the far end of the table and did not apologize for what he was wearing. Elliot Marlowe opened the discussion before Adrian had finished setting up his laptop. "I want to be direct about where I stand," Elliot said. He was 52, had a background in risk management, and approached most problems by calculating the cost of being wrong. "We have a certified dealership with manufacturer backing telling us the repair costs $200,000. We have an uncertified 18-year-old from a private garage telling us it costs $14. From a liability standpoint, there is no version of this where we gamble a $1.4 million warranty on the second opinion." One of the attorneys nodded. "The warranty language is fairly clear on unauthorized third-party access to onboard systems. If something goes wrong with any of those vehicles in the next 3 years, and Sterling Crest can point to an unauthorized intervention, we lose coverage on the entire fleet." Clara looked at Adrian. "Do you want to respond to that?" Adrian opened his laptop and turned it to face the table. "I ran the test 3 times, he said. "Same result each time. The fuse fails under heat. The voltage drops. The system generates false fault codes. New fuse, no codes. The fix takes 20 minutes. He paused. The technical bulletin documenting this exact failure pattern was issued by the manufacturer and distributed to all authorized dealerships, including Sterling Crest. It describes the diagnostic procedure and the correct repair. If their technicians followed their own manufacturer's documentation, they would have found this." Elliot leaned back. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious invoice," Adrian said. The room went quiet for a moment. Elliot glanced at the attorneys, then back at Clara, his expression unchanged, but something behind it had shifted. Not conviction, not yet, just the first trace of doubt, working its way into a position he had been certain of an hour ago. Then Damon spoke, calm, practiced, final. "Mrs. Renshaw, the warranty exposure remains regardless of the diagnostic discussion. That's the material issue here." That afternoon, a letter arrived at Vale Sun Garage from Sterling Crest Legal Counsel. It cited unauthorized access to proprietary vehicle systems, interference with an existing service contract, and potential liability for future electrical issues. It requested that Adrian cease all contact with Renshaw Meridian Group regarding the fleet vehicles and preserve all documentation for potential legal review. A separate filing had been submitted to the Regional Automotive Licensing Board requesting a review of Vale Sun Garage's operating credentials. Martin read the letter twice, set it on the workbench, and poured himself a coffee without saying anything. Adrian stood in the middle of the garage and looked at the space around him. The lift his father had installed in 2009, the shelf of hand tools worn smooth at the grip. The spiral-bound notebook open on the bench. He had the evidence, he had the documentation, he had the truth, laid out in 12 pages with voltage graphs and timestamp photographs. And none of it was enough, because the people who needed to act on it were afraid, and fear did not respond to evidence the way logic did. Fear responded to authority, to credentials, to names that carried weight in rooms like the one on the 14th floor. He didn't have any of those things. That night, Adrian stayed in the garage after Martin left. He didn't work. He sat on the stool next to the workbench, with the burned F-47 fuse in his hand, turning it over between his fingers. It was a small thing, cylindrical, barely 2 inches long, lighter than a coin. He had found the problem. He had documented it. He had been right about every single technical detail. And tomorrow morning, Clara Renshaw was going to sign a contract with Sterling Crest Motors for $200,000 worth of repairs that were not needed, because the people around her were more afraid of losing a warranty than they were interested in finding out who had manufactured a $200,000 lie. He set the fuse on the workbench next to his father's notebook. He had spent the past 14 months trying to hold this place together through stubbornness alone, taking every job that came through, working late, charging fair, being exactly the mechanic his father had taught him to be, and it had not been enough. The rent was still behind. The customers still hesitated at the door, the sign still tilted. And now there was a legal letter on the workbench, threatening to take the last thing he had left. He heard the side door open. Martin came in without knocking. He never knocked and set a paper bag on the corner of the bench. 2 sandwiches from the place, 2 blocks over that stayed open late. He pulled up a stool and sat down. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then, Martin reached into his jacket pocket and set the old photograph on the workbench between them. Gideon and Roland, standing in front of the open engine bay, grinning. "I've been thinking about this all day," Martin said. Adrian looked at the photograph but didn't pick it up. "Roland Bellamy," Martin continued, "senior engineering consultant, manufacturer's North American division. Been there 12 years. His team wrote the F-47 bulletin 3 years ago." He paused. "He went into that company to do right by people. That's what he told your father. I don't know if he kept that promise, but I know. He wrote that bulletin. And I know that bulletin would have saved Clara Renshaw. 200,000 if someone hadn't buried it." Adrian looked up. "You think he'd respond?" "I think your father never stopped believing Roland would do right when it came down to it," Martin said. "Whether that's still true after 20 years, I genuinely don't know. But you've got nothing left to lose by finding out." Martin ate his sandwich, left the photograph on the bench, and went home. Adrian sat alone for another hour. Then he opened his laptop. At 3:07 in the morning, he found a professional contact address for Roland Bellamy through the manufacturer's engineering division directory. He attached the full 12-page report, the video documentation of both test cycles, and the voltage data logs. He did not ask for a favor. He wrote 3 paragraphs describing the situation plainly and ended with a single line. "My father taught me that a good mechanic is never afraid of the truth, no matter how small it is. I believe you were taught the same thing." He sent it before he could reconsider. Then he turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, the burned fuse still on the workbench beside him, and waited for morning. Roland Bellamy did not respond that night. Adrian was at the garage by 6:30. He ran a brake inspection on a pickup. He replaced a serpentine belt on a sedan. He drank 2 cups of coffee and checked his email. Nothing. Martin arrived at 7, made a fresh pot, and started organizing the parts shelf without comment. By 8 o'clock, Adrian had accepted the possibility that Roland had read the email, recognized the name Vale, and decided that a conflict with a major dealership was not something he wanted to involve himself in. It was a reasonable decision. Some debts to the past don't survive 20 years of distance. At 8:40, he put on his father's garage jacket, picked up his laptop and the small plastic bag with the fuse, and drove to the Renshaw Meridian building. The conference room on the 14th floor looked different in the morning light, sharper, more deliberate. The kind of room designed to make certain outcomes feel inevitable. Clara sat at the head of the table. Elliot Marlowe was to her left. The 2 attorneys were present. Lydia sat midway down the table, with her laptop open, her expression carefully neutral. Damon Krell sat at the far end with his own attorney beside him. When Adrian walked in, Damon looked at the garage jacket and allowed himself a small smile. The 14th floor, the pressed suits, the folder of contracts, the warranty documents stacked neatly at the center of the table. Against all of that, a jacket with a name stitched in faded thread made a particular kind of statement, and Damon was content to let the room make it for him. "I appreciate you coming," Clara said to Adrian. Her voice was neutral, which meant she had not yet decided. Damon spoke before Adrian could respond. "Mrs. Renshaw, we're not here to question anyone's intentions, but we are here to protect your interests." He glanced at Adrian with the specific patience of a man who had already won and was simply waiting for the formality to conclude. An uncertified technician accessing your fleet's onboard systems regardless of what he found represents a documented warranty risk. The responsible path forward is to proceed with the authorized repair and preserve your coverage. Elliot Marlowe nodded. One of the attorneys opened the contract folder. Adrian set his laptop on the table and played the video documentation without responding to Damon the engine warming, the voltage meter dropping in real time, the 14 fault codes appearing simultaneously on the dashboard. Then, the replacement fuse, the second test cycle. The clean dashboard. No edits, no narration, just the work. The room watched. When the video ended, Damon leaned forward. The warranty exposure remains regardless. "I have a question," Adrian said. His voice was level. The F-47 bulletin was issued by the manufacturer 3 years ago and distributed to all authorized dealerships, including Sterling Crest. It describes this exact fault pattern and specifies the correct repair. Before Sterling Crest quoted $200,000 for module replacement, did their technicians consult that bulletin? Damon's expression didn't shift. "Diagnostic procedures are at the discretion of our certified technicians." "That's not an answer," Adrian said. The room was quiet. Adrian looked at his laptop screen. No new emails. He looked back at the table, the warranty documents, the attorneys, the folder of contracts, and understood with complete clarity that he had brought everything he had to this room, and it still wasn't going to be enough, not because he was wrong, but because being right was only part of what was required, and the other part was the part he didn't have. Then his laptop chimed. The notification was a calendar alert, a video call request, sent 4 minutes ago, from an address in the manufacturer's North American Engineering Division. The name on the request read, Roland Bellamy. Adrian accepted the call. The screen filled with the face of a man in his mid-50s. Gray at the temples, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, sitting in what appeared to be an early morning office. Roland looked at Adrian for a moment. Then he looked at the garage jacket. "You have your father's handwriting," Roland said quietly. "I recognized it in the report margins." He looked at the conference room visible behind Adrian's camera. "Tell me who's in the room," Roland said, "and then let's finish this." Adrian turned the laptop so the camera faced the room. Clara Renshaw, Renshaw Meridian Group. Elliot Marlowe, Operations, 2 attorneys. Lydia Karras, Sterling Crest General Manager, a Sterling Crest corporate representative, and Damon Krell, Service Director with his counsel. Roland looked at each face in turn. His expression was unhurried, the expression of a man who had spent his career in rooms where people argued about technical facts and had long since stopped being impressed by the arguing. "Mr. Bellamy," Damon said, his tone shifting into the register he used for people who outranked him, "we appreciate your time. Our concern here is purely about warranty protocol." "I read the report," Roland said. He was not unfriendly, he was simply not interested in the preamble, all 12 pages. "I also watched the video documentation." He paused. "The diagnostic methodology is correct. The F-47 thermal fuse failure pattern is accurately identified and accurately documented. The repair procedure Adrian Vale applied is consistent with the manufacturer's own service bulletin number, TSB BUSH4471F, issued 38 months ago, and distributed to all North American authorized dealerships, including Sterling Crest Motors." One of Clara's attorneys wrote something on his notepad. Regarding the warranty question, Roland continued, "Unauthorized third-party service does not automatically void coverage under the manufacturer's warranty terms. Warranty invalidation requires documented evidence that the third-party intervention caused or contributed to the failure in question. Replacing a fuse with an identical manufacturer specification component, performed correctly, does not meet that threshold. The warranty on MS Renshaw's fleet is intact." Elliot Marlowe's posture changed not dramatically, but enough. The calculation he had been running since the previous morning had just been revised by someone with the authority to revise it. He set his pen down and did not pick it up again. Damon's attorney leaned toward him and said something quietly. "I have one question for the room," Roland said. Has anyone verified whether TSB 4471F was active and accessible to Sterling Crest technicians at the time of the original service visit? The Sterling Crest corporate representative opened his mouth, then closed it. Everyone looked at Lydia. She had been listening without speaking, her laptop open in front of her. She had read Adrian's report the day before. She had sat with what it implied and told herself she needed more information. Now, in front of Roland Bellamy and 2 sets of attorneys, the moment for waiting had passed. She logged into the dealership's internal service management system and navigated to the bulletin library. The room waited. After 90 seconds, Lydia's expression changed. TSB 4471F, she said slowly, is listed in our system as status, non-applicable. It was removed from the active technician interface. She scrolled further. The status was changed 14 months ago. She looked up. The account that made the change is registered to Damon Krell. Nobody spoke. Lydia kept reading. Her voice, when she continued, had lost its careful neutrality. I'm looking at purchase orders from the past 18 months. Central control module orders are running at 4 times the historical average. The volume doesn't match our logged fault diagnostics. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was very quiet. The repair quote for Ms. Renshaw's fleet, the 200,000 quote, the creation timestamp is 2 days before the first vehicle was connected to a diagnostic scanner. The room absorbed that slowly. The quote had been written before anyone had looked at the cars. Damon's attorney put his pen down. Clara picked up the contract that had been sitting at the center of the table, the Sterling Crest Service Agreement, ready for signature, and set it face down without a word. Lydia looked at Damon across the table. She had worked alongside him for 4 years. She had trusted his department, approved his budgets, defended his team's numbers in quarterly reviews. She looked at him for a moment with the specific expression of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about a person. Then she looked at her assistant. Call it, suspend Damon's system credentials, and get our compliance officer on the phone. She looked back at the table. Now, please. Damon said nothing. He looked at the surface in front of him with the stillness of a person who has run out of moves and knows it. Roland's voice came through the laptop speaker. Ms. Renshaw, I'd recommend preserving all diagnostic records from the original service visits for the investigation. I can provide a written, technical statement from the manufacturer's engineering division confirming the bulletin status and the correct repair procedure. It would, Clara said. Thank you. Roland looked at Adrian through the screen. Your report was thorough. The voltage interval documentation was the kind of work that takes patience most people don't have. Adrian nodded once. My father taught me to show the work. Roland was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face, not quite grief, not quite pride. Something older than both. Yes, Roland said. He did. The call ended. The room remained still for a moment, the particular stillness that follows when something large has shifted and everyone is adjusting to the new weight of it. Then Lydia Karras closed her laptop and started making calls. The 8 vehicles arrived at Vale Sun Garage over the following 2 days. Adrian and Martin worked through them methodically, one at a time. Same procedure each, same documentation for each repair. F47 fuse removed, tested, confirmed failed under heat. New fuse installed, full test cycle run, dashboard clean, notes logged in the spiral-bound notebook with the cracked cover. 8 vehicles, 8 fuses, 8 times $14. Total parts cost, $112. Martin wrote the final invoice by hand, the way Adrian Vale had always done for jobs he considered important. He used the carbon copy receipt book from the top drawer, wrote each line item clearly, totaled it at the bottom, and set it on the workbench for Adrian to review. Adrian looked at it for a long moment. Then he signed it. Clara Renshaw came to the garage herself to collect the vehicles rather than sending a driver. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a dark coat, without assistance. and stood in the bay doorway, looking at the space. She had been in a great many professional environments over the course of her career. She had rarely been in one that felt this honest. Adrian walked her through the documentation for each vehicle. He explained what had failed, how he had confirmed it, what he had replaced, and how he had verified the repair. When she asked whether there was any risk of recurrence, he told her the truth. Same specification fuse from the same production batch would carry the same thermal vulnerability. And he recommended replacing the F-47 on a preventative basis across all 8 vehicles on a 2-year cycle. They worked out the terms of a long-term service agreement at the workbench, standing up without lawyers present. Clara paid the 112 invoice on the spot and wrote a second check, a deposit against the service contract that was enough to cover the garage's back rent, repair the roof, replace the failing lift with a commercial-grade unit, and give Martin Keel his first steady paycheck in 14 months. Martin, who had been pretending to inventory the parts shelf during the entire negotiation, accepted the offer without making a speech about it. He shook Clara's hand, said thank you, and went back to the shelf. Lydia Karras came to the garage the following week, alone and without calling ahead. She stood at the roll-up door and waited until Adrian noticed her. She told him that Damon Krell had been terminated and the matter referred to the State Attorney General's office for investigation. Sterling Crest's compliance team had identified at least 40 additional cases over 18 months where the F-47 bulletin had been suppressed and module replacement had been incorrectly quoted. The process of identifying affected customers and calculating restitution had already begun. Then she said, "The best diagnostic work I have seen in 9 years of running that dealership came from this garage. I want you to know that I understand what that means about how we treated you." Adrian thought about the afternoon Damon had walked him out of Sterling Crest, the look on Damon's face, the specific contempt of a man who had decided that Adrian's ceiling was low and found it irritating to be reminded otherwise. "I know you didn't know," Adrian said. "Not all of it." Lydia nodded. She looked around the garage once more, then left. Roland Bellamy drove up from the city on a Saturday morning 3 weeks later. He didn't stay long. He walked through the garage slowly, stopping at the workbench to look at the spiral-bound notebook, the old voltage meter, the row of hand tools on the pegboard. He didn't say much about Gideon. He stood in the space. Gideon had built and let that speak for itself. Before he left, he shook Adrian's hand and held it for a moment. He would have liked the report, Roland said, especially the voltage intervals. Adrian smiled. That part was his idea. I just did it the way he showed me. Roland nodded once. Then he got in his car and drove away. That evening, after Martin had gone home and the garage had gone quiet, Adrian took the burned F-47 fuse from the workbench and set it on the shelf next to his father's photograph. He propped the first invoice against the shelf bracket, so the bottom line faced outward. Parts, 14 outside. The new sign was up clean, lettering, level, properly mounted, lit from below by 2 small fixtures Martin had installed on Wednesday. Vale Sun Auto Repair. Adrian stood in the bay doorway and looked at it for a while. The street was quiet. The night was cold. Somewhere down Branton Row, a car engine turned over and caught, settling into an idle a sound that, to most people, meant nothing in particular, and to Adrian Vale meant everything was working the way it was supposed to. He went back inside, turned off the bay lights, and locked up a 14 fuse, a 200,000 lie, and one 18-year-old kid who refused to pretend he hadn't seen what he'd seen. Adrian didn't win because he was loud. He didn't win because he had connections or credentials or a seat at the right table. He won because he did the work carefully, documented it honestly, and didn't let anyone convince him that the truth was less valid because of where it came from. That's worth remembering the next time someone tells you that you're not qualified to ask a question in a boardroom, in a garage, or anywhere in between. The most dangerous thing you can do to a lie is simply refuse to walk past it. If this story meant something to you, subscribe because this is what we do here. Every week, real stories about people who did the quiet, unglamorous, necessary thing. No shortcuts, just the work. We'll see you in the next one.